Hi, hello, I'm Marina, that one girl that likes to talk a lot about houseplants, and welcome to Millennial Planter. Today I am finally making a video about Hoyas and blooms. I'm sharing my top tips on how to get your Hoya to bloom. Maybe you have a really stubborn one. Hopefully I can help you out a little bit in this video. I have been putting this video off for a while. I actually get this question all the time on how to get Hoyas to bloom. What can I do? Why isn't my Hoya blooming? And I've just been kind of skeptical to make this video, or doubtful, because I don't know. I feel like I don't really do anything special for my Hoyas to bloom. They just kind of bloom on their own. But then I sat down and I thought about it, and I feel like maybe what I do to my plants, other people just don't do. So hopefully this will help you out a little bit, because I really don't feel like I go through great length to get my Hoya to bloom. It's not really hard in some cases. It really just depends on your Hoyas. So let's just deep dive into the world of Hoyas and their blooms. Also, I didn't make an outline for this video, which was a mistake, but it's fine. We're just gonna go with it. We're just gonna wing it. It's gonna be fun. And then also, if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead, hit the subscribe button. I would love to have you in this plant community, and clearly you're watching a video about Hoyas and plants, and that's what this channel is about. So just go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button while you're at it. All right, let's get into some Hoyas. So let's get some quick things out the way. Hoyas are epiphytes, just like aroids are, like monsteras and like philodendrons. They like to climb up trees. They come from rainy, humid places, mostly in Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, a lot of those places. So just think like really rainforest type environments. That's kind of the key in unlocking Hoyas and getting Hoyas to grow, is to try to replicate the rainforest, essentially, which I know is kind of hard. But anyways, a peduncle is what Hoyas put out when they are about to bloom. A peduncle is a stalk that attaches to the stem of the plant, and at the end of the peduncle is a bloom. So when you see a bloom and you see these clusters of flowers and they're just kind of hanging down so beautifully, that is called an umbel. A Hoya can bloom and will rebloom from that same peduncle a lot of times, multiple times. So if you have a peduncle that didn't bloom, don't cut it off, just give it time. I'll share tips on how to get that to bloom eventually. Or if you do have a peduncle that bloomed and the flowers are dying off and falling to the floor, which is totally natural, don't cut that peduncle off, because in about 6 to 8 weeks it will rebloom for you, and it'll just be so magical. So eventually you will have a vine full of peduncles and a vine full of flowers, all flowering at different times, and it's just a really dope experience. And these blooms are the reason why people love Hoyas so much. Each species of Hoya have different blooms, different shapes, different smells, different colors. And this is really what draws people into Hoyas. I know I used to be a real foliage girl, and don't get me wrong, I still am. I love my foliage, leafy plants, but the blooms on these Hoyas are just out of this world and really just touches your soul, which is something we kind of all need nowadays, or all the time. But yeah, onto the tips. So as you can see, I have a lot of my Hoyas right here behind me. I like to keep them in a centralized area just to have them all together. I really love Hoyas. I've been keeping them and collecting them for about 2 years now, which is crazy to think about, because when I first started my plant journey, I hated Hoyas, and now I'm obsessed. But I mean, the blooms, the smell, the taste, they're so amazing and magical. And I truly love Hoyas. They're truly my top favorite genus of plants. So one thing I have to debunk, I have to break this myth, because it drives me crazy when I hear it. And it is, you don't need to neglect and not water your plant for a month in order for it to bloom. Can we just stop spreading that, please. I would not personally recommend somebody not water their plant for like a month or so just to get it to bloom, because the chances of that plant kind of declining in the long run from underwatering, there's a big chance of that happening. And your plants can be perfectly happy and bloom. I am case in point. Yes, I can underwater my Hoyas, but I haven't gone weeks without watering them, and I have had plenty of blooms in my Hoya collecting years. And yeah, it's just really infuriating when I hear people say that. And out in nature, in their natural habitats, they don't go that long without watering. And yes, if you neglect your Hoyas, they will bloom, because it's what we call a death bloom. They're trying to preserve themselves, so they want to get their seeds out as fast as they can before they die. And I mean, I don't want to like personify plants too much, but that's kind of sad if you think about it. So debunking that myth. Second myth I need to debunk also, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the blooming, and that is you don't have to wait for the leaves to get flimsy before you water it. I know this is a huge thing. Like, this is probably the first rule I hear when people mention Hoyas, is to don't overwater. Wait for the leaves to get limp and flimsy before you water them. Do the taco test. And while I think that's great if you're learning about Hoyas, I would not recommend that if you're getting into more meaty Hoyas, because there's a lot of Hoyas in my collection that I don't let dry out much. I actually kind of keep them on the moist side. I know it's really crazy to think about, but once again, they're coming from Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, really rainy, hot, humid places. So upping the water is definitely something that can help with your Hoya growth if you have a stubborn Hoya, or if you want to get a peduncle, because while a neglected Hoya will bloom, so will a happy Hoya. So my first tip would definitely be to up the watering if you are not watering your Hoya enough. And that can be as simple as putting it in a plastic pot, in a plastic cup, in a ceramic pot instead of terracotta. And I'm not saying keep it as moist as like an anthurium, but you want to wait for the soil to dry out and then water it. You don't want to wait for the soil to dry out and the leaves to get limp and then water it. That's also a way to stunt a lot of new growth. A lot of Hoyas will drop those new leaves if they are not getting adequate water. My second biggest tip for getting your Hoya to bloom would be to give it adequate lighting. Pretty much blast it with light if you can. One consistent thing I do with all my Hoyas is give them light. They get a lot of light. I have Barina lights underneath all of my Hoya shelves here, at least 2 to 3 lights each. So they do like a lot of light, especially to bloom. And I feel like just that consistent lighting has really helped me a lot with my Hoyas and getting them to bloom. I would say those two are probably the biggest tips out there. Like, the biggest tips to take away from that is adequate watering and adequate lighting. So the next tip that I would also give to you is to fertilize your Hoyas. You can go ahead and fertilize the leaves if you want to. I don't really do it that often, to be honest. I'm not a really big fan of Miracle-Gro, so I don't use the orchid spray, because I know that's really big with a lot of people. They like to mist their Hoyas with orchid spray. Personally, not crazy about Miracle-Gro. I want to try to dabble into like a DIY foliar spray. I think that would be really cool to experiment with. But I do fertilize with a liquid fertilizer. I use all kinds of fertilizers, really. I don't really have a specific one that I like, but if you are looking for a good liquid fertilizer, I recommend finding a fertilizer high in phosphorus. So if you look on the fertilizer bottles, they'll have 3 numbers, or NPK. That middle number is what you want to be higher. So like a 1-3-1 or like a 10-30-10, something along those lines. Phosphorus is something that plants use in order to make blooms. And yeah, definitely look for something like that. They're usually labeled as blooming blasters or something blooming in their title. But I will also leave some liquid fertilizers down below if you want to check those out. I fertilize mine in the growing season. I fertilize them almost every watering. I'm not even gonna lie. I am a big fertilizer person, but I just feel like my plants need a lot of feeding. They like a lot of feeding. And I also use coco coir as my base for all of my potted plants instead of soil or instead of leca. And coco coir is naturally inert. It has no nutrients in it, so my plants really benefit having an extra feeding. My last and final tip would be to research your Hoya species. So there's some Hoyas like Linearis, Crimson Queen, Crimson Princess that like to be really full and long and established before they bloom, and it's kind of annoying to be honest, because you'll be waiting for years before some of those Hoyas bloom. But then there's other Hoyas like Hoya Rebecca, Hoya lacrinosa, Hoya Calista phyla, even as slow growing as Hoya Calista phyla is, that just love to bloom, and they'll bloom faster than they'll put out new leaves. I know that's the case for my Calista phyla. So just research the type of Hoya that you have and see if it's a more prolific bloomer or if it's a slower bloomer. And if it's a slower bloomer, then you're just gonna have to wait a little bit. Maybe you can try switching up the lighting. Some Hoyas like to bloom in fall when there's less light. Other Hoyas like to bloom in spring when there's more light. So you could try switching it up, or you can try giving it a very brief dry period, maybe of like a week or 2 would be stretching it. But just switch something up and see if that'll get your Hoya to bloom. Or if you need another excuse to buy a Hoya, you can just buy an easily blooming one. Not even going to lie, I purchased my Hoya lacrinosa because I heard it was a very prolific and easy bloomer, and that is so true. That girl gave me a bloom in like the first 3 months I had her, and it was amazing. It was my first Hoya bloom experience, and it was just such a magical moment. It's always such a magical moment when I get my Hoyas to bloom, especially new ones. Such an exciting time. So here's your excuse to go buy yourself another plant if you needed it. But I would suggest Hoya lacrinosa, Hoya Rebecca, maybe Hoya Calista phyla. Mine did take a little bit to bloom, but once it got that peduncle formed and it started to bloom, it's just blooming all the time now. I would even say Hoya retusa or Hoya obscura. Here I actually have a little Hoya obscura bloom right there. As you can see though, she is super sun stressed, and that could be a reason why my Hoya obscura has bloomed so much, because she's just getting an insane amount of light. But she's super happy, and those blooms are just so freaking cute. It's a very, very floral scent. It's really nice. That's actually my favorite part about Hoya blooms, as it is for a lot of people, is just getting that scent. It's always hard to describe the scents though, at least personally. My favorite though is probably my Hoya DS70. This one bloomed for me for the first time a few months ago. Actually, it has a little peduncle, but these flowers smell like butterscotch, and it just brings me back. I don't know, it just gives me such a nostalgic feel, and I actually really love these blooms. I love it when this blooms. I'm always smelling it. I'm always telling my friends to come over and smell it, even though they probably already have smelt it the first few times it bloomed. But yeah, it's definitely my favorite, which is kind of funny because I've heard other people say that this smells like cat pee, this bloom. So I'm really glad I didn't get that type of bloom, because every time I've smelt it, it's always smelled like butterscotch and fresh baked goods. It's really amazing. And I would probably say my last and final tip kind of goes hand in hand with the previous one, and it's just patience. If you don't want to buy another Hoya, I totally understand that, but just patience. Once you get that care down right and you get that peduncle, it will just keep blooming for you. So don't cut the peduncle off. It will re-peduncle. It will re-bloom from the same peduncle. Goodness. Take a shot every time I say peduncle. Don't cut the peduncle off. It will rebloom for you, but just be patient with your Hoya. It will bloom eventually. Trust me, I'm right there with you. I'm waiting on a bunch of mine to flower. I would love to see my compacta flower. I heard they smell like chocolate, and I want to smell it. So excited for that one. Eventually it'll happen. I mean, once I get the care right for this, compactas and I we struggle. We struggle. But patience and understanding your Hoya will ultimately just give you that blooming experience. I know sometimes I feel like we're just waiting years and years, but it will happen. I promise you it will happen, and it'll be such a magical moment. And you may even tear up a little bit when you see it. Not speaking from personal experience, and it'll just be so magical. And then when you get that first Hoya bloom, if you haven't treated your plant with a systemic, just lick the sap. Look it, I promise. It's actually a thing. The sap is really sweet. Think like simple sugar, simple syrup, or like a sweet honey, like a sweet water. It's so good, and it's such a cool experience. I love to just like all the Hoya blooms. Also, Hoya Liquors Anonymous is a Facebook group, so I'm not just making this up. And the last thing I want to talk about is, let's say you finally get your Hoya to peduncle and it has all these peduncles and they're just budding and you don't want to blast them. I would recommend to make sure you're keeping up with the watering, specifically at that time if you want to see those peduncles form, because letting them dry out too much, in my experience, has led to the Hoya blasting them, which is really unfortunate. You know, the peduncle will still be there, but the buds will not, and me and my Hoya Mathilde have been going through that. Honestly, I think she needs to be repotted. She's really thirsty all of the time and I can't keep up with watering her. So I think next time I'm going to put her in a plastic or ceramic pot, and one that is slightly bigger, so hopefully she holds on to a lot of that moisture, and all of these peduncles that she has will finally start to bloom for me. But she has probably about, I don't know, I want to say 5 peduncles on here, and none of them have budded for me, which is really unfortunate. So that's something that I'm going to do: up the watering, repotting it, make sure she just stays nice and moist to get those peduncles to bloom for me, because I want to see you, I want to see your flowers, I want to experience them in person. And make sure you keep up with the light. You don't want to move your Hoya around too much once it has those peduncles and those peduncles are forming, because that will kind of just mess up with the whole process and it will probably most likely blast. I will say that they are a little bit more finicky with their peduncles and their buds, and they can blast really easily and really quickly with any sudden change. Just keep that in mind. Hopefully that will help you a little bit if you have a stubborn Hoya. Now I just want to quickly show you some of my plants that have bloomed for me. All of the blooms have dropped right now though, which is kind of unfortunate since I'm making this video, but I'll be sure to put pictures up so we can see. This is my Hoya Calista phyla, and as you can see right there, she has that peduncle, and it kind of looks like that because it has actually bloomed for me quite a few times. The more this Hoya blooms, the more bigger it's going to get, sort of like how you see these blooms typically don't last that long, maybe 4 to 5 days. So this is one of my shortest lived blooming plants, which is always kind of sad because I feel like I see it bloom and then the next time I look at it, it's droopy and they're all falling. So that's kind of sad, but it blooms all the time, more so than it wants to put out leaves. As you can see, it's a very small plant, doesn't have many leaves to it, but I just introduced her to some high humidity and she's been putting out some new leaves. So we got that leaf there and we have that leaf there, and I would say the misshaping is just probably either from lack of watering or I would say maybe even humidity issues. I'm not really too sure, but we'll see how the newer leaves come in and see if they still have that problem, because I did just move all my Hoyas up here, and in my plant room I have higher humidity, so yeah. So this is actually my David Kamingiai. This is one that bloomed just from death bloom. It was in pond for a while, and I couldn't figure out the pond. You can see the peduncle there. If my camera focuses, it's there, I promise. But you can see the pictures here. And as you can see, the leaves look very dehydrated. I did end up putting it in soil because soil is just what I know. I don't know pond. I did receive this Hoya in pond, so I was just trying it out. And yeah, the leaves they just got so wrinkly, and you would think it's from dehydration, which I'm sure could have been the issue. But now I'm just really hoping that they bounce back. I do enjoy this Hoya a lot, and those blooms were so exciting to see. And they were just they're probably my favoriteest blooms that I've seen yet. Maybe I'm just saying that because they're new blooms that I've experienced, because all these other Hoyas that I've had bloomed, I've experienced for a while now. So this is my newest one, but I loved it. I enjoyed it so much. So hopefully this one will bounce back for me in no time. I also pulled this one away from the grow light just a little bit because I felt like maybe that wrinkliness just could be from too much sun stress, which is definitely something I've done. I have bleached my Hoyas before from too much light. So yeah, hopefully the mixture of less light and some soil will do this Hoya some good. And the last Hoya that has bloomed for me, at least from what I can remember, is this Hoya Numelroidoides. I can never say the name of that, but this is probably my most favorite scent. This one smells like a jasmine. It's a really strong jasmine smell. It's so strong actually that this has been in my grow tent. As you can see, like, she just doesn't look happy. This is such a slow growing Hoya. So I'm hoping some humidity will do it good in my grow tent and it'll start to actually grow. But it was sitting in my grow tent and I could smell that bloom in my whole plant room. Like, this plant was just out in the open. It was kind of crazy, and I had to look around to make sure I didn't miss any other blooms because it was just that strong. Even though it was locked inside of my grow tent, it made the whole room smell like jasmine, and it was really cool. And yeah, this I wouldn't really recommend this Hoya just because I struggle with it so much, but it is a fun little bloom to smell and to experience. Also, if you have any Hoya Numelroidoides tips to get this thing to grow, let me know. I know other people have said it's a slow grower, so maybe that's just what I have to deal with, because I actually do like this plant a lot and the cute little fuzzy leaves. Here I have Hoya Mandy Parensis that is in bloom. Those blooms are so teeny tiny and so hard to focus on. Very Dischidia-like. This Hoya actually used to be called and considered a Dischidia, but DNA evidence says it's a Hoya, so Hoya it is. But those are super cute. I love those a lot. And then the last one is Hoya Numelroidoides. And if I'm being honest, these blooms kind of creep me out. I don't know why. I just don't like the way that they look. But they're there, and we embrace them. The pink is super cute though. Probably the biggest umbel I've gotten from any of my Hoyas. Super cute Hoya Numelroidoides. So there we have just a couple quick tips on how to get your Hoya to bloom. I really hope this was helpful in some way. I get the question asked all the time, and this is just what I have put together in my own personal experience and just some things I have tried out. If you take anything away from this video, I would probably say just patience. If you have a really stubborn Hoya or a really slow bloomer, and just researching the species. Blooming is really just species specific when it comes to Hoyas, and they all bloom at different times in the year. They all bloom under different requirements. So if you can somehow figure out how that one species blooms, then you can pretty much unlock the secret to that Hoya blooming. Hoya Facebook groups are also really great, really helpful. There's so many educational people there and so willing to give you tips and help you out. So just search up Hoya groups on Facebook and join whichever ones sound good. I'm a part of a lot of them, and I've learned so many things, and I've added so many Hoyas to my wish list. So if you have any Hoya tips for me or for others, definitely leave them in the comments down below. I'm always trying things out. There's some Hoyas that I am dying to get to bloom. I'm looking at Hoya obovata that I've had for like 3 years now. It's massive. The leaves are the size of my hands, and she still refuses to bloom for me. It's quite rude, if I'm being honest. If you have any other questions, Hoya related, plant related, let me know in the comments. I'll try my best to answer them. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, join the plant community. I'd love to have you. I hope you all are staying safe, sane, happy, and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!